Now, I've been waiting patiently for a day like today because I have the problem is this time of year I want to ride every day. But today they're predicting some rain in the afternoon, and to be honest, this is something I wanted to do. I wanted to swap these discs out on the GS. I had polished them previously, and that's already on one of the videos. I mentioned, but I didn't show this little trick. And I guess you can do it before, after, or even during. Actually, you can do it while it's on the bike. It's a little inconvenient. And all this is, I want to show this. Pretty simple. An ordinary bolt, a washer, and a nut. And the purpose, what I want to do is spin all the buttons. Now, if I had any really amount of these to do, you could do it with, you could make a special tool. I know they sell tools to do this, but this works out fine. Once that's tightened, and I just want to make sure that these, because these are used discs, that I don't have any issues with these sticking, and I want to turn that nut. Now let me try to show this up close. Maybe I could do this. We're going to try our lucky old macro lens for this. What I like to show is that I want this button to turn. If that button doesn't turn reasonably easily, now I can feel the button. I don't want to feel the washer. So here's the problem. If you put your finger on a washer, the washer turns. I want to feel the button. So I want to make sure that as I turn it, now if I had a sticky one or one that really was hard to turn, what happens is, you really want to turn it with an electric drill or something, because or a socket wrench, you'll be here all day. But once you know that that spins relatively easily, you're ready to go on to the next one. Now, as Glenn found out in doing his 500, and I restored the brake disc on that, on a real race bike, these have a little bit more play than on a street bike, which allows the disc to do this. On a street bike, these are EBCs, they have a wave washer that keeps tension on it. So it'll always have some tension. You can't just turn it with your finger, but you should be able to turn it reasonably easy with the wrench. And that's, if you can't do that, if you find one that's stuck, the worst of all worlds is to find two that are stuck opposite each other. Then for sure, you're going to have that pumping at the brake lever when you really get the brakes, good and hot. Or sometimes you get it every time you use the brakes. Anyway, we're going to try to do this swap out today. I told my friend from Portugal, next time I took the front wheel off the bike, I'd kind of show how I did it. He had a little hesitation about taking the front wheel off. It's not a big deal, but I'll show the way I do it. I don't think there's anything more than a little common sense you need to do it. So let me mention a couple of things. Over the years, I put this ceiling fan. They were on sale at the end of the season for $29 in Lowe's. I picked one up. I also, for about 20 bucks, $25, I picked up a come-along. Now, yes, there are a lot of jobs, and I have the stands to put both ends of the bike up. But in this case, because I'm going to be putting a lot of force on some of these parts as I put them back together, I like to support the bike with a come-along. The come-along pulls the front wheel up off the ground an inch or two, and then I usually put something under the mufflers, either the jack or the box or a box, a milk crate, anything, just to stabilize the bike. Now it's going to allow me to do several things when I do that. When I want to turn this, put torque on this, and again, I'm oversimplifying this for my friend in Portugal, but you don't want to just have, an example is some people pull a bike, I've seen this, pull a bike up and put bricks or something under there. That's not a good choice. But this is something, if you have a beam anywhere in your garage, a tree, a shop, anywhere you can hook that, that's, for working on motorcycles, worth its weight in gold. Also, when you're using, and almost everybody I know has one of these motorcycle stands we use when we do a bigger job than this. Well, the nice thing about doing that is, this is your safety net. If that bike ever tips over, it can only go so far, and this supports it. And I have seen people that the bike has fallen over and they've damaged all the fairings and everything. So A very good investment, cheap investment. But I like to have the safety of when I'm working on these bikes, especially here, what would happen is this GS would fall into that GS and I'd have a GS bowl of cereal there or something. So I always think when I'm working on stuff, I like to be, because I'm always out in the garage alone too. I can't even yell for help. Karen would say, I can't pick him up off the ground, he's too big. So this is what I think is worth passing on, is just having this as your safety thing. So worthwhile. I also want to be careful when I wrap this around, however I hook it on, frame. You don't want to put it on the gas tank. You'd like the strap not to pinch any cables or wires. And if you just wrap it around and around, you've got to shorten it to the height. And that would depend on how high the beam is. But that is a great tool. It's inexpensive. And now one of the things you can see is the front wheel we have off the bike. Well, now we can raise and lower the bike in complete safety. I think what I'll do is I'll put the jack under there just as a redundant safety thing. So if it, for some reason, these straps are rated at 2,000 pounds and so is the come along, and this bike's about probably 500, so we're well within the safety range. In fact, we probably could pick both of them up at once. 2 for the price of 1, as the baby would say. So for me, this is kind of cut and dry, but I wanted to show it step by step. I want to take the 2 caliper bolts off. I want to wedge something in when I pull the caliper out so that the caliper, just in case somebody or myself, you bump into the line. And then I want to take the caliper and with a zip tie or a couple of zip ties, attach it to the frame. I want the caliper out of the way. The step 1 is to get that caliper out of the way without having the pucks fall on the ground, and you don't want to have the caliper squeezed together if possible. Now, since all of the bolts on this part of the bike, anything to do with braking is going to be Loctited on, sometimes these are a nuisance to get out, but and this will give us a chance to inspect the calipers, clean everything up, the brake parts cleaner, see how much pad material we have left, clean the heads of the bolts all up on the buffing wheel, clean everything up. That's always something I like to do whenever I take something like this apart. Now, one thing it's handy to have, these are painting sticks. Ordinary painting sticks that you stir paint, and they're free. Now, what I use them for, one of the things you can use them for, this will just hold the caliper apart and make it very convenient to put it back together. Now, you can see where the brake pad wear indicators, we still have some material on these, and I also have a spare set of brand new pads, but I'm going to clean this all up. That's the next step on this is just to physically clean everything up and then get this, put this over here with some zip ties so it's out of my way. I don't want, see what happens if you leave it hanging like that. As you pull the wheel on and off, you tend to chip the paint on the wheel. So I like to get that up out of the way. Again, I use zip ties, but you could use string or whatever. I just try to make it as convenient as possible. But again, I find having those calipers hanging by the wheel just to be a nuisance whenever I'm doing a tire change or a job like this where I'm working on the front end of the bike. And of course the next step is just to repeat everything from the shims, get that other caliper put up there, and then we're ready to pull out the bolts and pull the front wheel. Now, I thought I'd mention another thing, and again, because I'm trying to make this a 101 kind of a video, every bike has different spacers and different sets of hardware that it's not the same on this bike on both sides. So a great idea, it doesn't matter for me because I just have another bike that's exactly the same right over there. But if you didn't, it's a good idea to take your camera out, take a picture of every time you do something, you take that nut off, take a picture, and then put all the shims. I like to put them on the spacers on this side, the ones that go on the other side, and how they slide in. And then if I get confused, and I'm confused more than I'm not confused, what happens is, and it's very simple to do this, it's really simple in fact, you can basically look at the pictures backwards, and that's how you're going to want to put it back together. Taking pictures along the way, and in my case I shoot video, so it makes it even more well, nothing's foolproof when I'm concerned. But anyway, I hope these tips help. That's the whole point. Now, every bike is a little different, but most bikes, what's a good idea, or I think a good idea, is to just break this nut, not to loosen it all the way, but break it with a wrench, because once you loosen these two parts, the axle's going to spin. So if you can get a wrench on there and just break it free, and again, I Loctite everything, even though you really probably don't have to on some of these bolts. I'm a fanatic for Loctite and everything, because I don't want to be riding down the road and even a small little, these loosen up. And I've heard a story from a friend that he took it to a dealer and they never tightened these bolts, and he was going over a bridge and the front wheel was wobbling around. I'm not sure if I'm getting that story 100% right, but getting these on and getting them Loctited and equally torqued with a torque wrench, kind of important. Or I guess it could ruin your whole day. Now another small tip, and if you see what I do, I lay the parts that go on this side of the bike. There's the bolts hold the caliper, the cotter pin, and then in sequence how the parts came off. Because there's going to be a spacer in here, and there's a spacer on the other side, and then there's a spacer in here. So if I line them up in the order they came off, it's pretty obvious. To put it back, I just go backwards. When in that case, I'm doing it on video as opposed to taking photographs. But either way, to record how... If you're a professional mechanic and you work on the same bike over and over again, yeah, but I work on a different bike every time I work on something. So, and my brain's not that good to begin with. So yes, the next step is to just loosen these, not take them off, loosen them. And when I go to put them back on, I'll take, and the parts are all basically hand tight, I'll take each one off and put a fresh drop of Loctite on it. And by loosening them, I can slide the axle out and just pull the wheel. Now again, because this is a really basic, simple 101 video, some of the older bikes, not all of them, have a speedometer drive, and you've got to basically get the cable out of the way. This unscrews, the cable will come right out. And again, like our friend in Portugal, I just hope that, you know, this inspires some people to, because the reality is, try getting guys to work on an old bike, unless you got a lot of money. Now that's going to mean this is free. So this is now, this is pretty simple, I just have to loosen these up. This is why I like to have it supported, because everything on here is Loctited. Maybe overkill, probably somebody's laughing and saying, yeah, you make it hard taking a bike apart, but when I'm riding, and especially if I'm riding a bike hard, and I tend to ride hard from time to time, not always. Now, to get the axle out, two possibilities. This is going to come right out, or I got to go get a rubber hammer. See if it's a lucky day. There you go. I want this on this side of the bike. I know it goes in from that side. Speedometer drive on that side. Spacer on this side. And the front wheel comes out of the bike. Famous last words. That is, on this bike it's a little difficult because you have these things by the fender. There it is. And there's the front wheel. So now with the calipers up out of the way, the speedometer cable free, I can get in there and I can clean areas of the bike that I probably haven't cleaned in a couple of years. If there's any mud up under the fender, I can get it out. I'll spend a little time cleaning this up, but I have my parts lined up that go back on this side. And believe me, more than once I've taken something apart and then which side does the spacer go on and which side does this go on, and needless to say, if you do it every day, see, here's a good example of something. If you don't work on GSs all the time, if this falls on the floor, you don't know where it goes. Well, it goes in there, and it goes with that side in. This side has no lip on it. So if I record everything, it just makes the assembly of it a little more bulletproof, a little more predictable. Now, because these bolts have all been Loctited in here, and never use Loctite on aluminum screws, you'll find out why when you do. They can tend to break when you take them out. Oh boy, that one's... These are really in there. Oh, I wanted to get one broken. The reason I wanted to show it is once you get to this point, you can spin them out. I have a T-handle, but with Loctite on them. Now what I like to do is one side of the bike at once, because if there's going to be a spacer behind this disc. This disc has a spacer behind it. And I like to keep the bolts that were on this side and the spacer on this side, everything intact. And at this point, see, if I wanted to make this faster, I could take these out. I've already broken the other ones. I could take it out with a T-handle. And again, we're not having a race, and unlike pro mechanics that get paid by the hour and would use an air hammer on this or something, I like to delicately and gently take everything apart. But again, the trick here is I want to do one side at a time, keep those bolts on that side. Even though probably don't have to, it just makes it more predictable for me. Thank God we got this fan in here. Boy, that fan, today you could die without that fan. I wanted to mention something. I use all AutoZone stuff because it's cheap. But anyway, brake part cleaner, you don't want to get on any paint, number one. So what I do is spray it on a clean paper towel and clean this area up here. While I have this side apart, I can get in here, not with brake part cleaner of course, but with a clean rag, clean everything up. Now, I understand, I over clean things, and by the way, never spray this. You come back from a ride, spray it on your engine, it'll catch fire. In fact, we were up by Bob Navola's that day. It was pretty exciting, in fact, spraying stuff around. Anyway, that's not the point I wanted to make. The point I wanted to make is while I got this apart, I can get in areas in here that I never would conveniently be able to get into. And by doing one side of the wheel at a time, and sometimes these old bolts, they freeze up. I don't know why everything's, this bike's over 40 years old, so 35 years old, I can't do the math. It's an 82. But I'll tell you one thing, I have two of them and I still enjoy riding them, and every time I ride it I think, what a great bike. It just suits my needs. My rear end and that seat fit perfect together. Okay, so we take a break, and these, by the way, the Suzuki ones, just for anybody who wants to know information, there's a right side and a left side. But on EBC ones, there's not a right and a left, and don't ask me why. But I know these go in the rotation of the tire, because I've looked at the manual. I'll clean this up. I have 3 sets of these now. 3 sets that are, I'm not sure they're, well, we're going to find out. We're going to find out just how bad they were warped, or if they're warped at all. Okay, so this is this side. We've spun the buttons. Everything's ready to go. And it's a good idea if this is on the bike to do that spin the button thing every once in a while. Line this up. Get our Loctite out, and another thing some people may not know, there's red Loctite, permanent, blue Loctite, for someday you want to take it apart. 1 drop on every bolt. Worth its weight in gold. These Allen wrenches, what happens is, the end where you see the coating is worn off, this starts the radius off, and it tends to, sooner or later you can just spin a bolt, or it'll just strip the Allen part of it. So what I like to do is go over to a grindstone, keep this cool, don't get it cherry red, just grind it, grind it, grind it, and put a nice, what I call a razor edge on that. It just keeps the bolts from rounding off the inside of the Allen heads. And that's a great tip, by the way. So we have to grind in this to a razor edge, keeping that point on there. And you've got to do that every once in a while, assuming you use the tools. Now what I want to do is get these all snugged up. And then I'll torque them the same way you would torque the head on a motorcycle or on a car in a star pattern. Opposite, opposite. I want to get them all just hand tight to begin with. That again may be overkill, but I like overkill. I like having more money in the bank than I need to spend on these projects. Anyway, sharpening up your Allen wrenches every once in a while, a good tip. Especially on a day like today where they're predicting big rain. Big rain, but it's so sunny out there. It's They could be crazy. Maybe I shouldn't have done this. I should have gone for a ride. I don't know. That's the gamble you take. But this is something I really wanted to do. I like to always have no compromise on any braking system. That's one thing I don't want to have. Okay, now I wanted to show one other trick. It's a great trick. This bolt here did not want to come out. It was kind of frozen in. And what I did, I took a Dremel tool. I did this for Luciano one time on a steering dampener on a Ducati. Grind a notch in it so it's the equivalent of a big giant, and of course we got buckets of bolts over there. I'll just replace this bolt. And then what, oh, as it flies across the room, killing somebody. This is something you really want to have. Make sure it's going in the right direction. And this, by using this takes a hammer. I don't know what the right word for this tool is. I've had it for so long. But what happens is, you hit this with a rubber hammer and that almost always gets the bolt out. So if you've got one frozen in and it really doesn't want to come out, or if you strip this internal part, or a lot of people like to use heat. Well, sometimes if it's around a gas tank or something, you don't want to put heat. But just grinding that with a Dremel tool with a parting wheel, that's a great way to get bolts out that don't want to come out. And this guy will just replace them, of course. The rule of working on old motorcycles, anything you take apart for any reason, save the bolts. Even if you throw the part away, save the bolts, because as I go through here, here's what I found. I found the exact bolt I need, and I found a spare one that isn't polished yet, so I'll just run down and polish it. But you can see before they're polished, I like everything polished. And we, luckily enough, found two exactly the right size from other projects we've worked on. Never throw the bolts away. Great tip. And that's what these videos are all about. They're not show-off videos. They're something you can actually use if you're a backyard mechanic. Good information, I think. Okay, one side's done. All the bolts are torqued down. Again, that crisscross pattern. Again, I don't think you can ever overkill something with the braking system. So now it's a question, I'll do this off camera, flip it over to the other side, and do the same thing to the other side, and we'll be ready to put the wheel back. Now while I had this apart, this is the little part that goes around the speedometer cable, and it had a lot of corrosion on it, so I decided to get a coat of black urethane on there. And here's something I learned about the rotors. When you do wave rotors, you don't want the waves to line up from this side to this side. Now I just noticed, and so I guess Suzuki already figured this out, or EBC, that when you line up the bolts, the holes don't line up. So the holes are in random places, not random, but they're in different places. So in other words, if the bolts lined up there, these two holes would be in alignment. But the way it works out, and I guess they figured that out years ago, but I was watching videos on the internet and I did see that with the wave rotors. I had anticipated getting wave rotors at one time, and then I started figuring out the cost would be over $500, so needless to say, I figured I'd just buy a couple more bikes with that money. Now this can be the part where it would almost always be to your advantage, whoops, if you had a friend. In my case, I don't have any friends, so I always try to come up with a way of getting most of these things, how should you say it, that I could work on my own. Now I know I have to get it past that little piece. Okay. Now because I have, and what I always do, just another little thing, as I have all these parts off the bike, I just run them on the polishing wheel. Even though they've been polished, this gives them a little extra polish. Makes them look even a little nicer than they normally are. And as you can see, I got the wheel in backwards. I didn't do that on purpose. You would think I would rehearse this stuff, right? Nah. No, the idea is we try to make it of passing tips on, because most backyard mechanics, it's always in the little details that you make yourself crazy. And an example is putting this thing back. This can really make you crazy all the time. Let's get that back in there. And as I always say, you have to see if it's your lucky day. Is it my lucky day? You know, we got that spacer in the other right way. We've got this one here. And this is where if you do have a helper, just knock the spacer out of this side, which is handy. But we can get this. I guess some of this information is useful anyway. Get this spacer in on this side, which always seems to be, I don't know why, it always seems to be a challenge. There we go. But I know from doing all this stuff that if you see somebody else do it, you can always pick up some tips, something you can learn, something that makes it easier. And I think basically all of us have this shared passion for our love of motorcycling. Make sure that's in place. That's in place there. Now, there is always a trick or a tip or something. I always know the last thing I want to do is these 4 bolts. And this has worked well in the past. What I'll do is I'll assemble a whole front end, make these just hand tight, and then at the very last thing, compress the forks a few times, tighten them, compress it again, because it allows this to self-center to a certain degree. And then the reality is I haven't invented any of these things. These things are all knowledge that Luciano has passed on to me, other people that are passionate about their motorcycles. And we're, I guess our one thing, our friend in Portugal, I hope we've shared some of the information that he'll find useful. The last thing will be to put the calipers on. That's kind of self-explanatory. But again, I don't want to tighten these bolts up until I run the forks a few times. Make sure I've got nothing sticking in there. I've got to hook up the cable on here. Okay, so the last thing, one of the last things, everything is the last thing here. Clip the zip tie. You got this little rubber grommet that's got to go in there. I got to take the little shims out I put in there and try not to drop. This always gets to be fun. Since we've spread this out more than it has to be with the little wood, and even doing this, sometimes the pucks fall out. What you can do about it. That's got to line up there. Here we go. Now just put one bolt in to hold it in place. Okay, that's got it. Because now I want to put, obviously, Loctite on this. Loctite should sponsor me. But again, if you've ever, and sometimes what's convinced me that the Loctite's such a good idea is many times I've had on the FZR, I've had the kickstand. Remember, these are really old bikes. I've had the kickstand come loose, and that's not really good. Now, something is not sitting the way it should here. There we go. Now I can take this one out. So the whole point of this is, whether we're doing this maintenance or in this case swapping out the rotors, anything you need to do, the front end of the bike, when you need to get it off the ground, number one, I always suggest that come along is worth its weight in gold. And it really is a safety thing. Right now I can't knock this, I really reasonably can't knock it over. Why whenever I say that do I think, uh-oh, am I going to be in trouble now? But anyway, these have to be snugged up, of course. I'll get the torque wrench out and get them down to the factory spec, which I think is, I'm not sure. I have it written down in the log. But I would not want one of these to come loose. Now, the other thing is, I was going to try to, and I changed my mind. I was going to try to rush through this and get a quick test ride today. But I realized, even though it's a sunny day out there, they're predicting some big, heavy storms in about an hour. So I figured, what the heck, I may as well. I have other things to do. And I never liked riding in the thunder. Not sure why. Alright, these are snugged up. A nice little, one little thing, these things are worth their weight in gold, putting all these parts back. I always make sure after I do that I haven't messed something up. After every step, spin the wheel. Oh, one final thing before I go around and torque all the bolts. Make sure there's nothing binding or rubbing. A lot of the parts on these are very, very tight fits, so I want to make sure nothing's grinding. And I haven't, from time to time, I have evolved the way that I do this. I've watched a lot of YouTube videos, picked up a lot of tips, gotten a lot of tips, of course, from friends and mainly from Luciano, but doing a job like this, there's no reason anybody, if they have a come along and a normal set of tools, I think it's within the range of most people, and I would highly recommend using Loctite. I think Loctite should sponsor me again. Now, the first 100 miles we put on this, 100 miles, couple of rides, I won't really try to lock up the brakes at 100 miles an hour, but I'll try to work into it soft. These have to be seated in again. There's still plenty of life left in those pucks, so I don't want to replace them if I don't have to. I hope you've enjoyed watching our little video. If you did, share it with your friends. And as I always say, thanks for watching. We're ready to go for a test ride, but I'm not sure we're going to be able to do it right now. We'll see what the weather's like after lunch, but basically so hot, and they're predicting big thunder showers. Anyway, again, thanks for watching. See, I almost forgot the last step. I didn't want to leave this step out. But this is what you really need to do with all the bolts just slightly tight, hand tight. Make sure there's no binding in that suspension, no binding in the braking. And now with that done, now I can get the torque wrench, torque up everything, and it'll be ready. Sorry I left that step out, but see, that's what it's like being old. Anyway, again, thanks for watching. Look at this rain in the middle of a sun shower. Oh my goodness. Oh, they're going after Glenn. Look at that. Look at this rain. Ah.
In 5 minutes, the street is flooded.
Wow. That's a sun shower. Well, boy, we have had weather the last week or two. Super hot.
Watch it.
Wow.